All right, good evening, everyone. Sorry that we're starting on Berkeley time, but thank you all for joining us today. My name is Lucas, and I'm the president here at Furries at Stanford. So today, I'm honored to have the opportunity to introduce Dr. David Spottacus Benaron, an inventor, entrepreneur, biochemist, and author of numerous field-advancing publications on medicine and medical tech. He's a founding editorial board member of the Journal of Biomedical Optics and a former tenure-track assistant and associate professor, then consulting professor in both the School of Medicine and the Department of Physics. If any of you own a smartwatch that uses a green light heart rate sensor, you're looking at the inventor of that very technology. Spottacus' inventions also include the first in vivo imaging of light-emitting genes, which became an important tool in the biomedical startup Xenogen and expanded the field of bioluminescent imaging, as well as the multispectral wearable optical sensor for tracking hemoglobin and hydration levels. He's also won a Lifetime Achievement Award in biomedical optical physics from the International Society for Optics and Photonics. In addition to all this, Spottacus is also a furry and fursuiter. For those who don't know, the furry fandom is centered on the appreciation of anthropomorphic animals, featuring all kinds of creative self-expression, from art to storytelling to making and performing. Perhaps because of this emphasis on creativity and care, it is also a space where many who identify as LGBTQ or neurodivergent feel like they can be who they are without having to pass for normal or neurotypical. To furries and non-furries alike, Spottacus shows us that you can be successful while still being proud and comfortable with yourself. Thinking and living outside the box can be something to embrace rather than something to hide. Without further ado, please help us in welcoming Spottacus.
Thanks all for coming. How's the sound quality for you? Can you hear fine? Okay. It's really good to be back at Stanford, which is kind of where all this stuff started, in a prior session. So it's a really amazing journey. And I wanted to sort of just talk about it. I called this talk Finding the Path from 0 to 1 to 1 billion communities. How do you take an idea, turn it into something that's real, and then get it out to the world so the world can see it? And I've had the experience, fortunately, doing that several times. Started here at Stanford, and I wanted to share that experience with you. I'm open, again, to questions. It's probably easier to hold them to the end, just because it's hard to start and stop to me. But feel free to raise your hand if you have an urgent or pressing. See if I can do this. So there's an arc to this story, and it's kind of interwoven like Looper. You don't really understand it the first time through. You understand better the second time through, and the third time through it all sort of comes together and makes sense, more or less. Maybe not entirely, but in Looper it does. And so I want to take you through that journey. And the journey is, how do you know what you want to do, and how do you find satisfaction working on it when you don't really fit inside the boxes that everyone else is in? So what do you want to do? That's look one. And I'm going to read a poem from Mary Oliver, who's a poet laureate and one of my favorite poets. She said, "I do know how to pay attention, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? What is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" And I think that's really kind of the thing that drives me. There's so many things you can do. What do you want to do? What brings you joy in life? So, from the earliest time I can remember, I wanted to be an inventor. I had a life full of clear Watson moments where someone spilled acid on themselves and invented the telephone. So, here's, Marie Curie, Albert Einstein, even Doc Brown. I think in my own self-conception, I thought myself as much closer to Doc Brown than the others. I didn't really foresee a career at a university. But Stanford was kind of the place to come to. I mean, it started off with the western half of the Transcontinental Railroad. If you go back to some of the earliest inventions here, You have the galloping horse, which was settling a bet between me and Stanford and another uh, uh, investor who were trying to figure out, did all the horses' hooves come off the ground? In the process, they invented the movie. And that was actually, here's a plaque in the Pokemon station if you want to stop there on Campus Drive. So for innovation, this is where the cloud was happening, this is where the internet was happening, this was the place to come to. So how did I get that? Well, loop 2 is not just know what you want to do, but understand yourself. And that was a lot harder for me. This is a photograph of me flying in a plane in the first seat, which I commonly do. There was a point in my life I wouldn't have done that. Now I just do it routinely. But if you think back to what childhood was like it was closer to this picture of Ash and his lab mate out of Fantastic Mr. Fox, where the lab mate comes and said, "You're different." And always in childhood, I knew that I was a little different than my classmates, and I didn't really understand it. But when I understood it, it developed into superpowers, and that's really what I want to share with you today, is how you take these sorts of ways of looking at things differently and can turn it into discoveries, whether you're STEM, or an artist, or a farmer, or a builder. Understanding where your strengths are really makes things a lot more fun. So let's start with the early invention. Here's the earliest one I can remember. I noticed that when you shine the light through eggs in the kitchen, you could tell which ones were hard-boiled because they scattered light, and the ones that were not hard-boiled because they transmitted light. And so I took a doorbell, one of these announcers that used to be at hardware stores, that shines white light and rings the bell to announce a customer coming, and I tuned it. So if you boiled the egg and you put it through, it didn't ring. But if it was raw, it would ring. And so I was able to make this egg detector. No commercial value to it whatsoever, but it's the earliest thing I can remember putting together and winding up on my own. Well, that turned into things I did in medical school. I learned that patients don't take their medications. So I invented this pill cap microprocessors were relatively new back then. This is literally the 1980s. They were big and took a lot of power. And we took a chip and put it in a pill cap that reminded people to take their medication on time. Now, one of the biggest reasons medication doesn't work is people forget to take it. So I thought this was going to change the world. Well, it turned out it was great tech. I presented it to General Electric and Corning Medical at 21 years of age, and I raised millions of dollars. We started this company, we made this cap, and we went to all the sales conventions, and no one bought it. It turns out people are pretty happy with their lives. They don't really need new toys and new things. They don't want more things they have to listen to or get buzz. And I didn't really understand why everyone didn't buy this. But it turned out that this is really part of feeling sort of different. I didn't really understand what motivated people. I did understand. I didn't want to sit at a sales convention booth selling devices for the rest of my life. So let's take this one step further. Where does this self-awareness come in? So as a child, I never really understood what motivated people around me. I mean, the typical things. The boys went out and played sports ball. I had no interest in that. I wanted to walk around the playground and look at rocks and look at the cool cracks in the asphalt. I didn't really want to run out and play. I wanted to read. I wanted to sit down with books. And so it felt like I was really from another planet. Now, back then, there really weren't words for it. So they called it growing weird or growing different. But inside my head, that was amazing. When I saw equations and numbers, I saw the colors. When I, let's finish the detail. Right? We have a word for that now. When I had dreams, they were lucid, and I remembered them. I wrote my homework assignments in my sleep, so when I woke up, my homework was done. When I tried to explain this to my classmates, they stared at me like they had no idea what I was talking about. And so the facts and the numbers switched in my head. and I lived in books, and I studied hard, and I did really good at math and science, and I excelled at that, and eventually got into medical school. But it was very different. And I didn't have the words at that time because people didn't talk about neuroatypical. They didn't talk much about Asperger's spectrum back then. But words had meaning. If you think about Helen Keller in her discovery as a blind and deaf person, learning to speak, when she first heard words and understood that that word water meant something that she could have in her hand, suddenly this whole new world opened up. And for me, the world opened up when I had the words that describe sort of an Asperger or autism spectrum disorder. This book was really an important one by Steve Silverman, San Franciscan, who unfortunately passed away last year. And what he showed was that there are features of the spectrum. And I hadn't read this in books or heard this from anyone before. I didn't even know these now. But we'll go through in a moment. When I'm inattentive, when I'm bored, I don't really care what the crust is like on cheese sandwiches that has to sit to the left or right of the safety dish. That just isn't interesting. I don't care what the sports scores are. I don't see the boxes. And that means I step on things all the time. And as a child, I was very aware that whenever I entered a room, there would be a point in the conversation about 15 minutes in where I'd do something that would shock people. And that's sort of makes you wonder what you're missing. I had slow reaction times. I didn't respond to balls as fast. I didn't pick up things as fast. I had dyslexia, reverse numbers, and disfluence, which means you set up some words that are close, but it's the wrong word. I avoided eye contact. So when talking to people, I looked away, and that breaks the social contract. I had situational unawareness all the time, being very surprised when people were not happy with the way I was responding to them that I didn't notice. I wasn't good at sports bother. I was unaware of major social cues, and I was distracted by noise, touch, and wind. That's really important when it comes to being furry. We'll get there in 1 second. Well, Steve Silverman published this book, put words on it, but as a child, I discovered furry on my own. There wasn't an internet, per se. So here's some of my early first things. What I found is when I went to school dances in college, even in high school, they created this safe space that it was quieter and it wasn't as noisy and it wasn't as touchy. And they're awful by today's standards for person. Compare this, which I'm wearing now, to the thing I made by hand. But at the time, it was magical. It created this space for me that I could live in. So now let's talk about the superpowers. These are the really cool things that I think changed my life and made it really interesting because if you're inattentive and bored, and this is that was Steve Silverman's book, it means you can be hyper-focused. I could focus on programming something if I had a task, and I could work on it for 36 hours without sleeping. Right? I mean, who does that, right? When I don't see the boxes, it means I think outside of the box and see solutions that others may have missed, not because they're not looking, but because they have a structure that I don't. Slow reaction times means I take longer to form pattern recognition, but when I see it, I see it in colors and second order effects and third order effects in my dreams and in the writing that I'm imagining in the equation. Those sorts of things is a superpower. Dyslexia means I'm a careful reader. I remember almost every book that I've read. I can tell you where the equations were in my physics books from high school. And influence means I'm really sensitive to context. I think a lot about how I put words together and what they mean. Eye contact avoidance means I can think anywhere. I'm not distracted by having to keep eye contact to pay attention to people. And situational awareness, same thing, means I'm not distracted. I can think about ideas. Unaware of social cues means I'm not afraid to leap into something that's different. And time again, especially as an executive in a startup, will suggest something and people say, wow, can you do that? It's like, of course you can. There's no rule that says you can't do that. And being distracted by noise and touch or wind, I'd say that may be fursuit ready. When I sit in this suit, it's not that I feel seen and judged. What I feel is safe. And so I can walk out in public and do this. The wind doesn't bother me, the noise doesn't bother me. It's a really great thinking voice. So what does that mean? It means that as a child, I didn't feel that sense that most people get when they get to high school or college and they find their tribe. I didn't. But when I found the furries, I finally found a group that had a language I understood, a communication way I understood, and I could begin to explain to others what it was like to be in this, and I found acceptance, that was the biggest surprise of all. And we'll get to that in a moment. The furries are kind of the new Illuminati. They, they're in shows. It doesn't matter if you watch The Preacher or if you watch Cats in the Tower or Beastars, you see furry written elements, you see shows cast and imagined by furries. It's long been said the internet runs on furries, right? And so it's become this thing that's gone from being different to being actually kind of almost like street creds. So if you put this all together, suddenly you have invention in science, medicine, and furry. And that's what made it possible, in my view, for me to see these things and make these leaps where people who are much better funded and much farther along and much more farther along in their career and much more confident in what they knew, we could pass them. And I'll show you some examples of how that happened. So this is me at Stanford. This is what an ICU looked like at Stanford in 1988 with a small 500 grams, so less than half a pound, baby who has but 40 cc's blood in it, right? Now, if you look at a small baby, this is a Life magazine image with when people had magazines that shows the transillumination of a fetus, you realize it kind of looks like that egg that I showed you. And I thought, that's interesting. We can shine light through and start to measure things. Now, didn't have that training in optics or training in spectroscopy yet, but I started asking around, how do we reduce the test? What can we find out by shining light into these tiny babies to make their life easier? And I learned with this guy who was an emeritus professor, and he was one of the co-inventors of MRI, along with Todd Smith from Stanford and Felix Bloch from Harvard. And he was an expert on non-invasive sensing. In the 1950s, he was trying to figure out with life what the mitochondria do, the energy powerhouse of our cells. He was part of the team that figured out how ATP was made. So he thought about this for a long time. And so I said, I'm going to go see him. I walked into his lab. I said, I'm really interested in studying light and physiology with you, Dr. Chance. Now, I didn't call his secretary. I didn't make an appointment. I didn't tell him I was coming. I just went. I don't think normally people would do that. They turned to me and said, here, take this pot of yeast and take it to Mike Maris down the hall and do some studying with me. See, he thought I was one of his summer students. Now, I could have said at that point, no, Dr. Chance, you misunderstand. But I just went. I was in his lab for a couple of weeks. And finally went back to him and said, by the way, I'm not in your lab. I think you're doing these studies with your students. They're really cool, and I have some ideas. And he looked at me sideways. And when we started talking about how we had thought about how to do his lab tests differently, what I noticed was working and not working, we just became fast friends. And we had a relationship scientifically that went over 30 years. He introduced me to this person who was also magical. This was the first newborn intensive care female physician in the world. She came out of Toronto Children's Hospital. Her name is Maria Delagoria Papadopoulos. And she just had the most amazing way of teaching. She would take her students, she'd point you down the room, and say, no, no, don't put it at the bedside. What's wrong with this person? What's happening? And everyone else would say, well, I haven't seen a lab test, and I don't hear the history, and I don't know how old they are. And I would just, because I was really loved observing things, I'd say, well, their skin's a little yellow. They might have stooled in the fluid when they were in utero. They probably breathe that in. They probably have an pneumonia, but they're not breathing really hard. So I don't think they're too premature. I think it's a mild infection, maybe a chemical burn. I think they're going to do fine. She'd look at me and she'd say, it's exactly right. She taught me how to not turn your brain off when you looked at things. Again, the superpower is just tuning everything out and not being afraid to say what you were thinking. And at the end, here's what I noticed. Everyone told me that only red light goes through tissue. That's not a big, amazing thing to say, but we were using light to measure things, and they were measuring oxygenation, and they only knew the red light in the tissue. How do you know? Look at the egg. Only red light's coming through. Look at that picture of the baby in Life magazine. Only red light's coming through. But here's what I saw. If you look at a bruise, there's purple, and there's orange, there's red. If only red light was getting into your skin and coming back, you wouldn't see those other colors. Or look at this yellow baby, which is jaundice. That means no blue light is coming back. It must have gone into the skin and come back. And then if you push on someone's skin, called a capillary refill test, you can see that redness blanch. Well, if only red light was getting into the tissue, how can you actually see deep reds and blues of venous blood being blanched? So I said, that can't be right. And so we did a study. And that's ultimately what led to 3 really big inventions. And I'll show you this. So what's the message here? People will tell you you shouldn't study, or why you shouldn't do things, or it's been done before. Sometimes it's wise. But most of the time, I found that if you see something and you follow it, there's really interesting stuff there that's just being ignored. So, to quote a well-known poem, Robert Frost, I should be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that's made a difference. And I think it's trying to find out what's interesting to you and following that led me into corners that were really obvious. Now, I didn't do it all. I had written Chance, Maria Della Gloria as leading lights when I was out in medical school. And at Stanford, these are the people that gathered around me. The heads of physics, Todd Smith, who invented the MRI, and Sweatman used to run the physics laboratories here. David Stevenson, who was an assistant dean in medicine. Donors that walked into the university, Walter and Eden Barrow, billionaires. They walked in and said, we want to give money to someone. And these sort of elderly couple was just sort of brushed off because no one really believed they were billionaires. And they ended up, from David Stevenson, our medicine leader, being sent to me because they thought we'd get along. And they said, what are you doing? I said, I'm inventing ways to figure out things without drawing blood, to help babies, not get brain injury and survive. They said, you think it would work? I said, yeah. They said, well, why are you doing it? I said, because everyone tells me it's not going to work. They said, tell me that you believe it's going to work? Yeah. And everyone tells you it's not going to work? Yeah. They said, you're funded. These guys apparently had invented several things. They invented the bearing process by which our steel was made in World War II. So it gives you an idea of their age when I met them. They invented a process by which tin could be made when boats came over to the glass in World War II. And they invested in an oil well in Texas where everyone had told them there was going to be no oil, and they became billionaires. And so they said, when someone says that everyone tells you you're wrong, we'll fund you. And so these people, out of the just generosity of their heart, gave me a fully funded lab when I was literally a first-year professor here. And I should have been in someone else's lab. And again, that's why our studies happened. Someone believed in us. And could I have communicated that earlier? No, I would have said something kind of a little more crazy when I explained how I thought things worked. But they listened. And understanding that superpower, at that point, I was a pretty open furry. It was really good. Here are two other people at the bottom, two clinicians, Jean-Marc Gottlieb and Susan Hintz, two really good clinicians, followed, and they gave me patience, and they helped me do this. So you stand on the shoulders of those that work with you and trust you and believe in you. But here's some of the crazy things we did that everyone knew wouldn't work. We put firefly glowing genes into cells, and then we took those cells and we stuck into bodies to make light bulbs. And we asked where the cells go, because if you want to know where cells go, you need millions of them to figure it out. Like a cell is 10 microns wide, 100 of them is a millimeter. A cube of a million of them is a millimeter cube. How do you find that in a body? We found we could see 10, 15 cells that glowed in a body instantly. Now, had anyone done that before? No. Why? Because everyone knew only red light goes to tissue, and firefly genes are blue and green. And that's why they didn't do it. There's a whole lab that was in the research group that was doing studies on DNA that said we had all the equipment to do your study in a day. And for decades, we never did it because we didn't think it would work. And this is the thing about really just seeing around corners. It's just having different people with different ideas together. And so our first glowing genes became a company that ultimately went public called Xenogen, meaning foreign gene. And you can see these transporters glowing in the ear of this mouse. These are pockets of cells, cancer. You can study cancer drugs in real time. Then you could kill animals, do 100 replications, pull out the cells and count them. Here, you could do one animal, you could see it way earlier before it reached the same sort of pain threshold. And instead of 100 animals, you could see one because you had it day after day. You could just watch it grow and you could watch it shrink. And this really transformed the way that sort of cell studies are done. The one that sort of got the biggest sort of impact, I think, in the general public was the green light sensor and the invention of sort of the wearable fitness model. So I want to show you the day in my lab here at Stanford we invented it. So we were trying to figure out, okay, if green blue light goes in tissue, where's the best light to shine in the body? What do you see? And so we got this special device that existed in the physics department here that went from ultraviolet at the bottom, you can see the scale, through the rainbow all the way to infrared. And we shined at the body and we asked, what light comes back? And more importantly, what light can reach the bloodstream? And we know that because it's pulsing. And what you see is where that black arrow is. That black arrow is the peak of green light. Now, that was impossible, according to everyone we talked to. It shouldn't have been there. But the fact that we did it, and see, you could actually make a sensor that could detect heart rate from just using green light shining in from a small little diode. It was revolutionary. It gave us one of the two things that created the whole fitness band revolution, which is now finally impacting medicine. We'll talk a little bit about that. So here's me in the lab. There's a refrigerator-sized device attached to that device on my head. You can see all the different colors and light we use. We shrunk it down to that little tiny thing in the middle at the bottom. Eventually put it in a band and a watch, that red one, and then we produced it as a commercial device. Now, we couldn't have done that at Stanford. That took tens of millions of dollars of initial research and then close to $1 billion of development. There's a lot of money that went into making these things work. But what we found was amazing. We put light in, so that's the method column. We started off with being pulsed heart rate, but then we found we could get respiratory. We can measure your lipid levels. We can measure how oxygenated your blood is. We can measure how hydrated you are. We can begin to look at your cardiac output. We can diagnose arrhythmias. We can diagnose dehydration. We can pick up edema and congestive heart failure. Suddenly, these are things that no one imagined. But what really drove this was I was approached by the CEO of a company called Java. They made these noise-canceling earphones, the kind that you could like walk around in a warp field and use digital filtering to filter out the sounds and the steps and the motion. And what they found was they were getting a very strong step count out of their earpieces. And that step count turned into the first step counters, the up, for example, from Java. And they approached me and said, if you put our movement with your light, what can we measure? And the answer is, you could start to use this as a clinical device. You could start to manage people's diseases. You could start to prevent diseases. Then we expanded the list: heat signals, electrical signals, sound and video signals, and ultimately that turned into the first wearables that hit the market. Now there's 1 billion people wearing it. But here's the initial team that made it. That's me off to this side, Chief Medical Officer. It's right here, off to that side, Chief Medical Officer. But you have people here with Google and Apple and Fitbit and health food companies and hospital companies. And this was the team that sat and made this happen. And what's amazing is I never imagined I'd be part of the team because I didn't know how to work with them. But suddenly enough, I could talk about being furry and I could talk about my dreams and I could show up to work in fursuit and they still liked me. And that was an amazing revelation that could happen. In the end, it's not the devices that I remember. It's the friendships and the colleagues that I made and the fun we had late that I remember. You can just see we're clearly having fun in these pictures, even presenting with a small jacket over your shoulder to Sandhill venture capitalists out, celebrating funding our clinical studies. We had so much fun, but I could do it in person. This is the Brazilian steakhouse in San Francisco, and I took my team out to wherever they wanted to go, and the rule was I was in person, and everyone accepted it. We never had a restaurant to say, what are you doing? The fact that we could do this is partly where we live, but it's also part of the acceptance that my team gave me, and the friendships are still there. So I mixed work and life. I traveled more. I did more furry things. There's me in front of an igloo. Me sleeping on a plane. The blue one is us dancing on stage with the churches. The one where I've got the horns. I'm dancing at 20,000 people at Shoreline Amphitheater, invited on stage by Jared Leto. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. This is like, for someone who expected to be alone all their life, this is unbelievable levels of acceptance, including in the bottom corner, here's a Zoom call with me in tiger suit, talking to my team. So we're near that end of that part of the story. I found friendship, I found love, I found acceptance, I found happiness beyond what I imagined. And it's been just an amazing, fun journey. And part of it is just really coming to terms and accepting sort of what's different and what you contribute and finding a place where you're happy. So the lesson, be based AF. Just innovate, not necessarily, right? Be yourself. And I found that people will come and accept you in ways that I never imagined. So that was then. It was a different research environment, different political environment. What problems can we solve today? I think they've actually changed in the last couple of years. I think our supplies and our future food supply, our energy supply, our water supply, our climate effects are all going to be important, and that's all going to come from hard work and a lot of STEM, a lot of science work. I think there's new capabilities at the intersection of Gen AI that aren't scary, and I wanted to talk about those because that's really what's dominated my conversation with venture capitalists and also with health companies this year. And last, just to emphasize, I think health is still one of the coolest places to do things. Why? Here's 4 reasons. It's everything. When you're healthy, you don't know you're healthy. But when you're not, you know. Ask someone who has cancer. Ask someone who lost their hips. Ask someone who lost their sight. What would they give to get that back? And the answer is everything. Everything. What else do we feel that way about? Not our cars, not our books, not our houses, not our movies. Our health lets us experience the world in a pleasurable way. And when you're not healthy, you want to mitigate that unhealthiness to have as good a life as you can. The second is something we didn't know back in the 1990s, but now, and that most of your health risk is based on measurable actions. It's lifestyle. In some cases, it's even what you're thinking about. This is the graph that I put together in 2015, where I was predicting about lifestyle, 40% of your health burden, genetics about 30%. There's a paper that just came out to show you how recent this is. This is in the last 10 days. Nature Medicine, where they looked at what are the risk factors for chronic disease, longevity, happiness. And they found that lifestyle is 80%. It's not that you don't have the genes, or you do. It's that how you live influences what gene sets get turned on and off. And we have much more control than we ever imagined. Through our food, through our activity, through our sleep, even through how we meditate or stress out or enjoy stress or drink coffee. All of these things influence it in a way that makes it the single most important contributor. So why is that relevant to this talk? And the answer is because the data is there. If your activity level and your maximum level of output is something that contributes to your health span, and you can know directionally what certain things will do. You don't have to do 100 things. Don't drink, don't smoke, wear your seatbelt, blah, blah. Just have to do a couple things. And that's a lot easier to do. And so I think these wearables, these sensors are going, if we can get over the data and the privacy risks, and that's a big issue, is that it's going to be able to have us so we can mitigate the effects of the world around us in a way that makes us healthier. And that is a paper I wrote a long time ago, about 2014, 2015. I called it Physician Monitor Thyself, as opposed to Physician Heal Thyself. Why is that something I was thinking about? Well, it was coincidence. I was in the ICU. I took care of very sick babies that had very small surface areas, and I knew when I could monitor everything, I could make almost every single one of them survive and get through. And it gave me an early window that I think most people didn't have. If you could put a lot of sensors on someone, you could do a lot of good. And then that's what turned into our health monitoring company that I'm working at now called All Health. AI and sensors, not to save money for insurance, but to make everyone healthier, make your health span, make your days more healthy rather than necessarily just longer. And I think it's going to be a really interesting area to work in. There is so much more that can be done there. So I want to talk about one more area, and that is, I think our understanding of how these different lifestyle things influence health, chronic disease. People think about disease as what happens in your final days when you're older. But it's really not. It's the fact that at 30 you grunt when you get up out of the chair, or you don't feel like going out anymore, or life isn't as fun. These kinds of things are actually controlled by genes that, as a group, I think are going to be much more controllable in the future. And age itself is a code that can be hacked with lifestyle, maybe meds, definitely first. That's been done at UCLA in the last 5 years. So that's more. That's the second company I'm working on. I'm going to skip just a couple slides. Here's the take home. I think you find something you enjoy. If you're doing something you hate, it just wears on you. Not that everyone has the opportunity to do that, but find something you care about. If you're here at Stanford, you have an opportunity to really control that path. And pay attention to the blues. There's a lot of things that work. I think there's a ton of stuff in health that works. There is a ton of stuff in energy and food, like instead of throwing water in the ground, let's monitor it with sensors and let's figure out how to not plow the lands. There's so many places that people can go, and now that we have some data and AI that we didn't have before, that I think the opportunities actually in the last couple of years got bigger. And last, just be you. It's really hard to live in this current environment. Politically, it's been hard for many groups of people to sort of live as comfortably as they were. We need to fix that. But be you as much as you can to do it safely. And the last I'll say is don't be bystander. It's very easy to watch all this stuff go by. But this is really, where does that all lead? And this is my last quote from Benaron. And the final line is what really sort of resonates. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I've made of my life something particular. I don't want to find myself sighing and full of argument. I don't want to end up being simply having vision this way. And I think that's kind of what drives everything I do. Be a participant, be active, enjoy it, take risks. It makes life a lot more fun. And with that, I'll open up to questions. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. The slides that you share is a PDF, so you can get them and download them. And I've got all the contact information for myself if you ever want to write to me. And I'll turn it over to a moderator because I can't see the hands.
Yes, hand over here.
Yo. Okay. I got two, maybe three. First, why the saber-toothed tiger? I guess because you always had an affinity for tigers, but towards the end you started going the saber-tooth route, and I was wondering why the saber-tooth.
That's a very good question. I had a conversation with the author who wrote the book Life of Pi. And I said, why animals? Why did you pick animals in your story to represent people and to be part of your story? What he said was, imagine yourself thinking of, a dentist in Florida. I'll bet you have an image in your head of that person. Now, imagine a dentist who's a tiger. It's like, okay, you don't have those sort of same things. It's kind of like the white whale and Moby Dick. You can project your feelings on them. But what's the personality of a saber-tooth? It's like, is it a cat? Is it a tiger? Is it more like a hyena? No one really knows. And so I found that was a palette that I could write more broadly on, and it just felt more natural. But I don't feel different in saber-tooth or tiger. I just feel cat.
Okay, and then number two, have you ever worked on glucose monitoring?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I can probably thank you then. I'm type 1 diabetic. You probably saved my life at some point in the last 10 years.
Well, so I'm glad I think there are many more people in the world today. It's a big problem, and type 1 is like type 2, right? You can't just say, oh, well, change your diet, right? And the idea of like going to sleep and not knowing, what happens to your levels, to be out of connection and in this sort of just unmonitored state, it seems like driving without a seatbelt on, right? It's like, why would you do that? So I'm glad it's provided help and comfort, and that's really great to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, over there.
Thank thank you for the talk. I was wondering, how does your involvement in what ways does your involvement in the free community enrich your perspectives for STEM or vice versa?
Every time I come back from a weekend, the conversation turns to, okay, Spotty, what you got this weekend? I feel like the team, for a while, was living vicariously with our lives. Um, the perspective is, when I'm in this kind of a mood, the world is just so much more interpretable to me. It's not so noisy, it's not so stressful. And so by participating in the community, I come back just refreshed when I can take time off. The other is just, we'll be lying in a fur pile, just like at the end of a con. I remember when I was just lying out in the concrete at the river outside of Amazon and just talking to people, or one at Further Confusion where we're talking and suddenly it turned out we had some common interests and then we had some ideas and we talked for 8 hours. I mean, where else do you just start conversations and find so many fascinating people? And so I find it just a group I'm so proud of. I mean, there's no ownership, right? But there's no test to get in. You know, your doctor, you have to take this test and all these boards and you have to have it. It just anyone can join, but they join because of a common interest. And I just find so many people fascinating that it's a pleasure to just go out and talk in the community. And I don't know of any other community that does that. That just reaches out and just talks to anyone. Maybe very small church groups. But, you know, we have such community here. I don't know if that lasts or grows, but it's one of the most amazing things. I gush over it.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Question.
So I have a question that's looking at like the intersection of your business ventures with neurodivergence, and this ties in with a very specific experience I had last quarter while vibe checking potential PIs to research with. During one of their group meetings, the presenter offered advice on like convincing and gaining trust of shareholders, and they gave some pretty insane advice that honestly is very hostile to a lot of what neurodivergence manifests as. And like I'm looking at my notes right now, and one of the pieces of advice is literally being strategic with questions you ask. Questions that reveal your ignorance will diminish your perceived like value to these shareholders, and like constantly always being in the know, and just in general contending with this kind of business environment that at least this person painted as very hostile to the neurodivergence that a lot of us in this room embody. How realistic is that you presented? How have you navigated that sort of space with the neurodivergence that you present?
It's a really good question. I mean, most of the world, to me, seems other. It doesn't seem friend-shaped, right? It has scary flaws and it's toxic as opposed to comfortable, tolerant, and friendly. And so I continue to be more naive about it and sharing more hopeful way of building things. But that has invested in a number of relationships where they say, you separate out, we wouldn't put you in as a CEO. And this is where it's helpful to find friends, people that you like to work with, people that you trust. I think all the things you mentioned are real. I mean, to be honest, we were just having this conversation before the group came in, the lecture was beforehand, about how, you know, the basic nature of a CEO is to be a bearer of information between the representatives that represent the investors and the representatives that represent the employee, the product, the company, the users, and they are different. Sometimes tearing apart a company and letting everyone go and destroying employment is a good economic choice for the investors. And so it's tough when people have different goals that aren't aligned. In the past, Silicon Valley, I think, and again, this is completely naive, but all these people, I think that's shifting. There is now a more historically representative realignment where the executives are thinking more about investment and return and less about employment and job security and return to people who are below the 90% line. And I think that's a sad thing because it's one of the things that made this place just amazing to work in. I didn't have to look over my shoulder as much. So I think it's real. I think there are people who think that way. My guess is, like many ideological arguments, you don't win by arguing. And so it's helpful to know where people come from. And in that case, I might share less, right? Although I still overshare all the time. So I think that's a changing risk, and it's happening more and more, especially as Silicon Valley companies are now situated on the East Coast, situated in Texas, situated in Florida, in places that have different economic incentives and structures and different cultures, right? Not 100%, of course. Right? There's always cost and city limits, right? I just think you find the people you work with and you go there, and that's what I came here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Oh wait, actually back there.
Kind of a different topic. One thing that resonated was the idea that you want to have like sensors on your measuring different aspects of your body. I was just curious if you had any like recommendations for like products that are like cheap and like really informative and non-invasive.
So the way I think about sensors is that there's all sorts of ways to get information. For example, we push a health survey to people with congestive heart failure, and Monday and Wednesday and Friday they fill out, and Monday and Wednesday and Friday they fill out, and Monday they don't fill it out. That's actually a sensor. Are they okay? Are they tired of our study? Are they getting sick? We found most of the time it means they're getting sick when they didn't fill something out. And so the emergent features that arise from these combinations of data points can come from really simple things. And then there was a body composition scheme that Halo, the one that Amazon had, their band, and they had this 3D camera that would scan different body composition. It was really sophisticated, and yet in the end, it just had so much noise. So there's a balance between the usefulness of the data, the accuracy of the sensors. There are quantitative people that put 1,000 sensors on them, right? And there are people that if they have anything more than an Aura, that's too much. It's too much sugar. So an example of really well imagined sensor was the band that Microsoft made, Microsoft Band. It had the best sensor set, and so does Whoop, of any of the sort of bands that are commercially out there in large number. And Band went away, and Whoop is growing, but slowly. So it's really hard to commercialize when you spend all your money, right, on making this great sensor set, because the future value of the data isn't there. You have to invest in the band. And no one, I think, has really overcome that. There are just ones that come and go that are really interesting, ones that measure core body temperature, ones that measure glucose without any skin penetration, ones that give you real-time measures of VO2 and cardiac output. All of these things, and they come and go, and no one's really nailed digital health yet. And I don't know why. So they're out there, and they come and go. But if you e-learning, I'd be happy to talk about loneliness.
Back over there. Yeah.
As a neurodivergent person, how did you continue to believe in yourself and your ideas when others necessarily didn't believe in you?
I'm trying to remember the name of the cartoonist. And it just came out a few weeks ago. And one of the characters said, "How do I feel confident?" And the person says next to him, "Pretend that you're confident." And he says, "When can I stop doing that?" What's the bottom line? Ouch. I think everyone is, we learned during the pandemic how dependent we are, even if you are an introvert, on social networks. Like, we love positive feedback. We dislike negative feedback. And we're all actually pretty fragile in the end. I mean, I'm sure there are people that can do really important things and not start to doubt themselves, but at some point you start to crack. And so what's helped me is having friends that when that time comes along, have said, "Go back for a walk, shut up," or "No, do not," or held my paw when I needed it. My mate, who's where are you? Over there. Has done this for me more times than I'm sure they'd like to count. Because, things are scary sometimes. Oh my God, did I just bite off too much suture? Right? So I think it's, for me, strength. It's not the things that, so when I was at Stanford giving talks, and we say, "Oh, we did this section, that's so great, blah, blah, blah." It's like I think to myself internally, that's not me. That's not me. And the conversations weren't. And so I find friends that want to talk about what's inside, and those are always my furry friends. That's my family. And I go with that as a default.
Thank you.
It's a tough part. We all have.
We can go back to you.
So I guess related to that, have you ever encountered like any stigma related to your identity in professional and academic settings? And if so, like how did you navigate them? Because I guess some of us are still fear the stigma, associated with.
Well, it's not unusual to fear. I mean, there are in the press, there are many more negative statements than there were a few years ago, and so you see it, and so obviously it's there. I feel really, I have to say it's luck, because it's not skill and maneuvering. I feel very confident in every case. And the one that really surprised me was when I gave this talk at Berkeley, Lips of TikTok posted one of the TikTok videos that was done during the talk and posted, "I would burn down the school," or something if my university invited a furry and my child had to listen to this class in person. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to engage because this is a troll and it's an organization and it's going to be awful. And the furries engaged, and I thought, this is just going to be awful. And after a few back and forth, they withdrew their argument. And I was really proud of the furries for that. I try to not talk people out of very core held beliefs because it becomes less about argument and fact and more about other systems, then it's really hard to address that. And so I've been very fortunate, as far as I know, that has not happened anywhere. I think we have a couple of contributed, but it certainly wasn't the primary driver.
Back up, Milo? Yeah.
So,
Thanks for asking.
so you have quite an impressive research career, and I want to ask on behalf of all of the researchers in the room, whether they be undergraduate researchers or graduate level researchers, PhD students like me. So it's very easy to get stuck into either just a routine of handling mundane day-to-day tasks, or let's say you've hit a roadblock in your research and things just aren't moving forward, like you can't etch the device correctly or what have you, and it's just an obstinate roadblock, right? So how do you manage avoiding just that daily routine or hitting that slog? And how do you reconcile that with, maybe not reconcile isn't the right word, but how do you turn that, those sort of obstacles into staying committed towards delivering an impact with your research and ultimately coming out with a successful device without getting trapped in those kinds of loops?
So I don't always give helpful advice on that. I had someone approach me. I would say this is around the time we were starting the commercial agent green light sensor, the first one, early 2000s. And they were, I don't give out details, they were in a PhD program here at Stanford. And they laid out what their trials were and what they had done and how they tried to get over the blockages, and they were 5 years in and they were nowhere near getting done. And I stole them into one of the companies because I said, you can't fix this, come work with me. I think it's a really hard problem, and it gets down to the, I think the philosophy of what the purpose of a teacher and investigators. When I grabbed a PhD, my goal was that everyone left and they could pass me, and do something really amazing that was theirs. And so I always made sure they carved out something that was their own, not just busy work. I know there are people who think of the early PhD path as being an input-output device to the higher level processor, namely the PI. And I think, that's great in a data center, but it's not really great as a humanistic sort of approach. And so part of it is just, getting to know the people. Do they have this obsessiveness about detail that is going to drown you? Do they have an obsessiveness about detail that will force you to be careful enough in your work that you will find new discoveries? It's a really fine balance, and you really don't know until you're there. And once you're stuck, it's really hard to change the dynamic, in my experience. It's not that you have to blow everything up, but it's really hard to get people to view you differently, to view your value differently, to think about coming into work differently, to do a restart. So sometimes a lateral move, and I'm not saying throw away what you've done, but sometimes a lateral move is the best way to kind of reset things, from lab to parallel lab, from project to parallel project within the same lab. But something to break the ice. If the problem is that you're just stuck, if the problem is that you're being used improperly, that's really hard. And there are it's just a philosophy in how you run your laboratories. But I don't think people learn by being close. I think people learn by making mistakes and being off on their own and having something they're invested in. And with Miss Frisch will say, make mistakes, get messy, right? Do that. I'd rather have them make mistakes than be frustrated, because if science isn't fun, you have 40 more years in it, right? And that would just suck if it wasn't fun.
Thank you.
Hopefully that didn't sound too negative.
Back there, I think.
Oh, sure. I remember you said that things like wind and touch were reasons why you enjoy or you prefer being in the fursuit. I was curious if there were any other things that helped with things that helped with those issues besides the fursuit, or like what other things did you experiment with?
You know, like the warmth and touch, hot chocolate, curled up, and the ability to work from home and not have to go out on a day where things are too much. Being able to say at work, I am really overwhelmed today. What are the chances that we could reschedule this till tomorrow morning? And then it's working for me, and I just don't think I can focus on it. And have colleagues that trust me enough to say, okay. And that requires that kind of relationship. So, going for walks, going for hikes. For me, the rhythmicity of, I live just across Highway 280, so there's hills there, and I might just go, do a climb, and 40 minutes around, and I'm back in an hour and a half, and going to redwoods, where the redwood leaves are different than all the other leaves I know. They're just so sound absorbing. When you walk into the redwood forest, like off of Skyline, and the birds are quieter, and everything's just hushed by this soft redwood leaf fall that's everywhere, and I can just sit there and I just feel practice now. So I found safe spaces when I was a student. It was in Boston. It was drive to the shore and sit on the rock and listen to the waves. And as an infant, a child, it was climb a tree. I would run through and I'd sit inside a tree in our yard for hours at a time until I was cold and could barely climb that thing when it was dark. There's always been this place. This I can take with me on a plane. It's so cool.
Yeah, back there. Yep.
I was just wondering, this is a little bit off topic, but I really like your suit. Did you make that yourself? Am I allowed to say suit?
So I'm very good with numbers. My artistic ability, think of the Picasso as sort of the 6-year-old drawing here, and I like it bad. I have no spatial sense. And I like art, but I can't do it. Although I've been told some of my drawings are okay. This was done by someone whose realistic work I really loved. It's done by husband-wife team. She goes by Corzel, is her name. Ranking on her irony. But she and her husband Matt have a business called Clockwork Creature, known as just Clockwork Creature. And they work on hyper-realistic stage quality suits. And the suit itself is a special fabric that is put together on a loom where it's sort of hooked in one at a time, so it's a stretch fabric, which means that unlike normal fabric, this will comply. And if I wasn't near an edge, I'd kick up to here. I'm afraid I'll fall off. But it basically, look down, it stretches. And she hand painted this with airbrush. She made every part in this. She cast glass eyes. I think actually glass eyes mean cast for. But if you look at them at the light, you can actually see a green iris reflection in the back. Her attention to detail is amazing. And it's so light, I can almost feel it. I'm not wearing it.
And do you, where's the eye holes?
So animal eyes tend to be farther apart. And so human eye, human eyes are close together. There is a piece of material, black, like using cloth, that from the dark inside, I can see, right? But you can't see it. So this is designed to be under UV lights, like that you can't. So if you're on a stage, it wouldn't. But my eyes are up here.
Thank you.
Yeah. And you can go into the lights. Yeah. It's really, this is my favorite suit I've ever had.
Yeah.
It took me 5 years to get it. It came in the
Okay, I wanted to ask, as an occasional slash aspirational inventor who struggles to find inspiration or things that haven't already been invented yet, what advice do you have about where to look for finding new ideas?
So I think it depends on what you're trying to achieve. For example, when I was at Stanford, I wanted to understand how light could be measured. So we went to Los Alamos Laboratory. We measured people did neutron scatter and said, hey, if you're writing code that runs on computers that simulates how photons, because they didn't have Maya and all the sort of rendering software then that includes scatter. But if I was looking for the business advice, so when I was here and started to spin up company, the person who invented the Lifespan finger stick blood glucose, it was a company called Lifespan. It was run by two people. One was a chemist from Stanford named James Pearson. He's passed away a long time ago. And Gary Stroh. And James was the chemist, and Gary was the business person. And what James told me is that, first of all, get yourself someone who is running this, because you don't want to be guessing at it. It's really frustrating to go and raise money and then not have accountability on it. You'll learn. And the second thing he told me, and I'm not sure I do this today, he said, walk into your chairman's office and quit. And I said, on a tenure track medical school path at Stanford, I am this many years away. I just got my assistant professor. I'm this many years away from a full professor. I can't just walk out. He said, if they promote you, they like you, and if you go out and fail and come back, they'll like you more. And I didn't believe it. I said, I've got a mortgage to pay. I absolutely, literally take my salary and I pay down my student loans and I buy food. I can't just stop. He said, give it 2 months. And so I quit that after doing it. He said, do it before you have regrets. And it was a really good thing to do. But in this day and age, I'm not sure that has the same. Stanford was really surprised that I was quitting to start a company. I think they would just tell you, okay. But find someone who is willing to work with you. And I learned so much. Every single business person that I sit next to, I still learn just I've learned I'm not the end user. I live in a digital bubble. I think everything's cool. and who is an end user really want? I'm not the finance officer at a large company. I can't think that black and white about things and disease. And so I try not to be those, but I try to have really good but smart people around me. And that has made all the difference between companies that raise more money. With our Doppler founder, and this is an extraordinary number, we raised over $1 billion to build the first Spottacus company. And the way he talks about the vision is still magic to me. Just magic. He's telling absolute truth, but he's spinning it in a way that people can understand it, as opposed to programs can understand. And so, in fact, when I tried to do it on my own, it never worked. It always worked when I had someone else. Okay? Never on my own self. Know your limits. And someday, like Xenogen, so he became a venture capitalist. He was a good venture, but it took him 30 years to do it.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Milo?
So the way that you've presented your research paints the picture that you've been committed to medicine all your life, which is incredibly noble and powerful and incredible. And I myself am in a place where I'm still sort of figuring out what exact discipline I'm going to settle in, or sub-discipline if we really want to be specific about how a PhD works. And so with that, there's a certain rage that I feel, and that certain disciplines seem allowed to make more waves or more innovations, or that more credence is led to those innovations, or that more resources are fed into innovation in this one space when so many other spaces either feel neglected or abandoned or just not trusted as much. So how would I reconcile those kinds of feelings with staying committed to a cause and making waves in something that I've been genuinely curious about for decades, while like still considering these other disciplines and the envy and awful rage fuel that they might provide?
It's interesting. One of the board members at the company that ultimately commercialized the green art sensor was a silicon chip maker CTO from Applied Materials. And he lived chemistries and vapors and sensors and didn't have a commitment to health. He had a commitment to figuring out how silicon could be more useful. And he was endlessly frustrated at the pace of healthcare. What do you mean you have to test it? You can just go sell it. No. You need clinical studies and you get approvals. Why? Every field has its own time, and there's times where things like everything is being sucked of oxygen right now because of Gen AI. For the last year, so many things that would have been funded before were not funded because no one has the education, everyone's afraid to invest. And so these cycles are seen, and when you're in a cycle where it's not funded, it's hard. Healthcare was not funded. There was a burst of IPOs, 1996, 1997, and then this valley of disappointment is like none of them performed to the hype, and investors lost their value. And for almost 10 years, there were almost no health IPOs. Well, if there's no IPOs, investors won't give you money because they are giving you money not to change the world. They're giving you money to get their money back. And the way they get their exit is an IPO, at least in healthcare at that time. And so suddenly, funding went away, and all these healthcare companies died. And so when you're in the middle of that period, I guess the question is it a long-term sort of area that will stay underfunded? In which case, if you're in a shrinking market, it's tough to get research funded. It's tough to find positions because people are quitting and being fired, but they're not being hired. It's tough to go out and pitch proposals because everyone's going to listen, but no one's going to fund you. Figure out how it gets interesting, and you can't tell 5 years necessarily in advance, but you can see a few years in advance. I think what's going to happen right now, venture-wise, is just like in the 1990s when everyone said, I rent apartments on the net. And so you just put on the net. And, what do? I do searches on the net. And suddenly you got a company. And I think I do apps to algorithms, find lead compounds, optimize lumber, figure out how to put out fires in Los Angeles with AI. And every single one of those is an opportunity. And I think that's a window before it gets saturated and people get a little disappointed. And that's going to stay that way for a couple of years. It may be slightly closing already. But if you can hook into what's hot, it makes it much easier to get moving forward. Even if it's just a glitzy advertisement, and it's not totally in your heart that that's the way to go. Sometimes a little marketing is useful.
Thank you.
Yeah, in the back.
I just want to ask, how do you see, I just want to ask because you put it on your slideshow and you also kind of mentioned it in the other answer, like Gen AI kind of playing into our everyday lives, because again, the media right now is dominated by AI, AI. What do you see it actually kind of playing into like 10, 20 years in the future?
So, if you look at the paper that just got published in Nature Biology or Nature Genetics, Nature Medicine, the one I just showed like 5 to 6, 7 days ago. And what they did was they asked people all sorts of questions, and then they put together and they said, how do you actually create a model for that's causative, not just correlative, but if you affect this, you will have this odds ratio improvement in whatever metric you're trying to measure. And so one of the things that just conceptually, you've got these pre-trained transformers that are trained on next best word, next best number, next best step from some set of steps that they're trained on. What they're really lousy at doing is writing new Hollywood scripts. They mix old Hollywood scripts. And so if you're like trying to use this to write poetry, that's kind of hard. I think people are doing it. Grammarly and all these ones early on said you make your essays better or your legal contracts better. But in medicine, in theory, you kind of know the outcome. Congestive heart failure, cardiac arrhythmias, diabetes, cancer, inflammatory disease, rheumatoid arthritis. And you can tie each of those to emergent patterns for things you didn't expect. The color of your nail polish plus the length of your nose predicts how you're going to do tomorrow in it. And so I think the opportunity for the generative approach is not to find these new ways of putting the data together, to find new diseases and things we didn't know about. Because I think that's hard. It's kind of what Watson originally tried to do. Let's try and figure out how we can put out this data and say what the next best step was in chemotherapy. And it was really hard because it's very complicated. But in general, lifestyle, how you age, how you feel, what your energy is, what your cardiac condition is, in general things, if you could find those things that correlate that maybe we don't know, maybe it is that if you eat ice cream before you go running the next day, you will live 1,000 years. We just don't know it yet, right? And finding those emergent features is what Gen AI does best. Not inventing those features, but finding the emergent features that are hidden in the data. And I think that's what superpower is going to be in health. And why I think in health as a biological tool, they're going to be very powerful. And whether you need a public data set to do it, a private sensor set, insurance or lab tests or wearables, whether it's public or private will depend on how protectable, how rapidly it can be productized and marketed, what pricing is going to be. We'll let the finance people figure that out. But I think those are both.
Can we come take pictures with you?